Hi everyone, let's look at both the ASAD, aggregate supply, aggregate demand, and money market graphs to describe what is happening during the COVID-19 or coronavirus. Let's first look at aggregate demand. When we're looking at aggregate demand, it can either shift left or to the right. Components of aggregate demand are consumption, which is about 67% of the U.S. economy, all the way up to 70% sometimes. And investment spending has dropped from about 20% at the good times to about 17% of the economy. And then the government has picked up from about 17% to about 20%, if not going higher because of the coronavirus. We're going to go ahead and leave imports and exports out of this. But we know that consumption and investment, which is the private sector, is the driving force behind the U.S. economy. It's about 84 to 87% of the U.S. economy, depending on which year you're talking about. We're going to focus both on the private sector, which is consumption and investment, and then we'll go on to the public sector, which is government spending. Again, we'll leave imports and exports out of it during this crisis that we're in. Let's look at the factors that are going to affect aggregate demand, and here are the downsides. Obviously, self-quarantine, meaning you're not going out and shopping or consuming. We had a stock market crash. There's a wealth effect. When people feel less wealthy, they tend to consume less. There's a fear of the future, fear of retiring after the stock market crash. And so what we see is happening is the aggregate demand curve is shifting to the left. In fact, it's shifting to the left greatly. I just can't do it on this graph the way I have it programmed. We're probably right here if the dot was right where it should be. And so I'm going to go ahead and just put it that we're going to be in a deep recession. Now, the upside is this, everyone, that because people are self-quarantined, and it looks like it's going to go on for another month or so, there's going to be this pent-up demand that once the crisis does begin to subside, people are going to start getting outside, consuming more, and hopefully shifting this out to the right, and don't just stay in a savings type of mode. We got to get consumption driving this economy to get us back to full employment. You know, the nice thing about summertime coming up is this is when people like to travel, go visit relatives and so forth. And if a cure for the coronavirus is found, you know, by summertime, or people could be tested or so forth, we could see aggregate demand shifting back to the right. That's the upside. Now, looking at investment, though, now you got to think of yourself as a business owner. How many of you are a business owner would say, I want to invest in this economy? So as you can tell, investment, being a good percentage of aggregate demand, is going to drop. And then also it's going to keep on dropping if this coronavirus continues. And so we have two things going against us: a decrease in consumption, a decrease in aggregate demand. But once the quarantine ends, laid off workers then will be brought back. And I say not all of them, because if I'm a business owner and I've laid people off, then obviously I want to hire back only my productive workers. So make sure that if you're a worker, that you're always one of the most productive workers. Businesses will be more sanitized during this outbreak, and new businesses might be created. And if that happens, then aggregate demand will shift back to the right. This tends to be a little slower go, as people are probably not as cautious as businesses are in general. That's just a normative statement. I could be wrong there. Let's see what the federal government's doing with fiscal policy to try to get this economy moving. Here's the upside about fiscal policy, is that it was happening in a relatively timely manner. It's tough to get over 500 people to agree on one thing, but fiscal policy was a lot faster this time as compared to when we went through the financial crisis back in 2008. Now, if you look at the new CARE Act that was signed into law on March 27th, here's what's going to happen. Individuals who make less than $75,000 will get $1,200, and this is non-tax money. And so if we're in this deep recession and people are getting more money in their pockets, You can look at married couples here. You can look at each individual child that a person has, up to 4, will get an additional $500. So what fiscal policy is trying to do is increase this aggregate demand by getting more money in people's pocket, and consumption will go up. So in the short run, this is good fiscal policy. Also, if you notice this fiscal policy, if we're in this recession, that the Department of Education will automatically suspend payments of direct student loans without any penalty through September 30th. So what will happen is students will feel a little richer, will go out and consume a little more, shifting aggregate demand to the right, obviously, until September 30th comes about, when their payments then are no longer suspended. Now, the downside of this might be this. In a recession, individuals who haven't lost their jobs might just save this additional non-tax disposable income, so it may not shift aggregate demand as far as fiscal policy wants it to go. And it depends on how quickly the money gets into the people's hands and whether or not the coronavirus threat subsides or continues. So there are some downsides going forward with this tax policy. Now, looking at government spending that was signed into law, it provides $1 billion in additional funding to states to be used for paying unemployment insurance. The nice thing about this is if you're unemployed and you're getting some money in your pocket, obviously you have to consume, and your consumption is going to be a lot on necessities because you're trying to survive and so forth, trying to shift aggregate demand to the right. The downside is, how is the government going to pay for all of this relief? They're going to have to borrow. And there is fear that if they do borrow, that this might drive up interest rates going forward. But we're going to talk about what monetary policy is doing to try to keep interest rates low during this time. Fiscal policy is also trying to do something to business taxes. If you remember from your class, if there's a change in business taxes, this is going to change the short-run aggregate supply curve. Now, because we're in this recession, that there's going to be fewer businesses supplying goods and services to us. And if you notice, if that happens, output goes down. But if you notice, prices are going up, but they're not going to go up because at the same time, aggregate demand is decreasing, causing real output and national income to even fall farther, which really increases this recessionary gap. But what small businesses are going to get out of this is a disaster loans program account of $20 million to provide money to small business owners, small business association loans to help overcome the economic impact. And so what they're trying to do is slow the short-run aggregate supply curve from shifting farther to the left. The upside about this is small businesses operating at the margin might be able to last out this supply shock. If people could just buy locally, going out to your restaurants and getting carry out, making sure you're staying 6 feet away from other people, if you can continue that, then this may slow the short-run aggregate supply curve from shifting to the left. Now, don't forget, aggregate demand is also shifting to the left, too, at the same time. Now, the downside of this is that this might not be enough for small businesses to continue to operate. The time will only tell. Now, what is the monetary policy? And we're going to look at the money market graph of what the Federal Reserve has done. So we're going to go back to March 3rd when the first emergency meeting occurred, and here's what the Federal Reserve did. The Federal Reserve lowered the discount rate to 0%, and it also lowered the federal funds rate a 0.5 percentage point down to 1.75%, and they did that on March 4th, 2020. And remember that the banks want to add liquidity to the market, and they figured that if they did that, that would at least soothe the financial markets. But then they had to have another emergency meeting, and this happened on March 15th, and the Board of Governors lowered the discount rate and the reserve ratio rate to 0%. Oh, by the way, the reserve ratio rate didn't change until March 26th. The discount rate changed on this March 15th. And they said they would buy up $700 billion worth of assets in the open market or through open market operations. So what the Federal Reserve was really doing was trying to increase this money supply by doing everything they could. They started to really just throw the whole monetary toolbox out in the open. What they did is they lowered the reserve requirement to 0%. They lowered the discount rate to 0%. And so they don't have those tools left because nothing that the Federal Reserve could do could add more money to this economy other than through open market operations. So what they decided to do on March 15th is increase their buying of bonds by $700 billion. The reason they did this is as the interest rates go down and the economy is in a recession, then what they're hoping is that at some point, people begin to borrow money at these lower interest rates, increasing consumption. Businesses will see this, increase output, and at least will start to get out of this recession somewhere down the road. This is their economic thinking. Then on March 23rd, the Federal Reserve announced on Monday that it will buy unlimited amounts, not just $700 billion, but unlimited amounts. So they're telling everybody that they're going to do everything in their power to keep interest rates low and get money out into the economy so that aggregate demand will shift to the right and that small businesses, you're going to get interest rates at lower prices. And so the central bank is really trying to help out this economy by lowering the nominal rate, which hopefully will lower the real rate. But the ultimate goal after this is all over is to look at the long-run aggregate supply curve. When you have low interest rates and there's investment going on, this is what the investment has to go into. Increase productivity, increase quantity and quality of natural resources, increase the quantity and quality of capital stock, factories, machinery, equipment, infrastructure, increase health and education. And so as long as we can get this coronavirus under control, here's where we are currently. Here's where we want to go, is back to where we were, and then look at policies that are going to shift the long-run aggregate supply curve to the right so that we could get more output at lower prices. Hope this helps you in understanding what's happening with this COVID-19 or the coronavirus. Sorry, I'm not going to edit this video. I have many other things I have to do at this point.